Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle DiMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the most recent event in our Fall 2021 Art in Focus series, looking at this beautiful glazed ceramic vase by artist Roberto Lugo. As you've probably heard me say, if you've attended any of our virtual events, our tagline for the Fall 2021 semester is that the art is live and the programs are virtual. So you can visit the Fairfield University Art Museum, you can visit our Bellarmine Hall Galleries and see the exhibition in which today's object is included. This is Roberto Lugo, New Ceramics. It's on view Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's free and open to the public. You do have to follow Fairfield University's COVID-19 regulations, and you can find out more information about that at our website, fairfield.edu/museum. But I also want to share with you that we are already looking ahead to spring 2022, and we are really excited to drop this tagline of the art is live and the programs are virtual and get back to doing programs in person. And in person, in particular for Art in Focus, we are planning to return to in-person 11 a.m. gatherings around an individual artwork for some informal conversation. We're also thinking about keeping these online sessions separately for those of you who might not be able to come to Fairfield, Connecticut and participate in person. So just as always in our quick live performances, we'd love to hear from you during this event. You can go and enter any questions or comments you might have in the chat box. Those might be comments about Roberto Lugo's work. We would also love to hear from you about whether you are as excited as we are to get back into the galleries and look at some artwork together. If you do come to the Bellarmine Hall Galleries and see Roberto Lugo's show, one of the things you will notice is that the piece that we're going to talk about today looks a little bit different from most of the other artworks in this exhibition. The title of the show is Roberto Lugo, New Ceramics, very short, very to the point, and it refers to the fact that with the exception of the AOC vase, as we call it in the museum, all of the objects in this exhibition were newly created by Roberto Lugo for Fairfield University for this show. We already got a comment from someone online, Ava Jane from Boston, saying that she had seen the segment on CBS Sunday Morning a couple of weeks ago and was very impressed by Roberto Lugo and his work. And that was the sculptor being interviewed in his Philadelphia workshop by someone from CBS, and he focused on a few of the objects, including a couple that were in our show. So one of the objects they zoomed in on was this Nina Simone mug that you're seeing sitting on top of another sculpted ceramic truck that is part of Lugo's pieces. But if you move to the other side of the gallery, away from the many teapots and cups that are part of the new ceramics that he created for the show, and I did not say that many of the pieces that he created incorporate gun parts from decommissioned guns that were purchased in Connecticut in a gun buyback sponsored by the Unload Foundation, which is a sponsor of our fall programming. And they were given to Lugo when he was an artist in residence at Next Haven in New Haven. So he had a Connecticut connection at the time. Flash forward a couple of years, he is based in Philadelphia. He teaches ceramics at the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. And we are just so delighted to have some of his exuberant, colorful, celebratory work on view here at Fairfield University. So what does the vase that we are going to be talking about, and these are just some photos I snapped in our gallery yesterday. You'll see that they are very different from the carefully staged photograph that was taken of the object in its studio with that brilliantly white light. This is giving you a little bit of a sense, though, of this object as an object. So it's in a case where you can move around and see, get a sense of it from at least three sides, not so much from behind it. But it shows you that on the back, unlike many of his teapots, which many of them feature two portraits of individuals, one on the front and one on the back, we, of course, as a museum had to decide which figure will face outward into the gallery and which figure will be visible by means of a mirror that we placed behind the pieces so that you could enjoy the full 360-degree rotation of the object. This piece, however, only has one focal point on the front. I'll go back to that professional image with its caption, Roberto Lugo, Vengo dal Ghetto AOC from 2020, a glazed ceramic pot, with credit to the photographer and also Roberto Lugo's gallery. So this piece was not created for Fairfield University. It's actually the only one in the show that doesn't fit that motif for the show. And it's included, frankly, because we, the museum staff, saw this on the Wexler Gallery website, and we loved it so much that we asked the artist, could you please send this one too? So if you're wondering why are we not featuring in Art in Focus one of the many fabulous teapots and teacups that incorporate these gun parts, they are awesome too, and we really hope you will come to the Bellarmine Hall Galleries and see them in person. Or if you can't, you can check out our website for this show, which is fairfield.edu/museum/Roberto Lugo. You can view all of the pieces that are in the show and even take a 3D virtual tour of the gallery space. We're featuring this one in Art in Focus because it is our small crowd of, we have 4 staff people, it's our fan favorite in the office. And it also just so happens, we did not plan this, yesterday was the birthday of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the US representative, who is the woman who is featured on the front of the vase. So as always with an Art in Focus, we like to think about an object as an object. And I'm going to go back for a second to just giving you a sense of scale. This piece is the largest of the ones that is in our show, but if you look online, you can find a wealth of information about Roberto Lugo, including, I will recommend his fantastic Instagram account, which is Roberto Lugo without wax. He posts daily. You can see examples of him working in his studio, new work that is coming out every day. You can hear from him directly. There's no better substitute for, hearing an artist's own words about their work. And you'll see that he makes pottery and ceramics in a range of sizes. He makes things that are very small, and he makes vases that are as tall as he is. So he has made some enormous pieces, and he's made some very small ones. His teapots and teacups that are in our show are fairly small, and this vase, the AOC vase, is a little bit larger. And I think you can see too with the in situ photographs from the gallery, you see the light gleaming on its surfaces, even through the reflection of the acrylic box in which it sits. And you see it even more vividly in this professional photograph. I think one of the things that drew me to this vase, I wasn't necessarily looking at who was depicted on it. I was drawn to the incredibly vivid colors, which is something that permeates Roberto Lugo's work. He uses this incredible riotous mashup of color, of pattern, of decoration, and then joining it to depictions of individuals from the Black community, from the Latinx community, figures that he wants to see celebrated. So if you come to our galleries and see our show, or you visit any of his other work in other museums and other shows, you will be in the presence of what he called an imagined conversation between individuals. And he said, he gave a talk for us that you can find on our YouTube page. And he mentioned that he always wants to represent individuals who are important to the community from which he came. He grew up in Kensington, which is a poor and troubled neighborhood in Philadelphia. He was able to find his path in the arts. And he said he's always cognizant of the fact that it wasn't a preordained thing, that someone from his background would necessarily have found a career and a vocation in making these artworks. So he finds great joy in creating artworks that encourage celebration. And part of what does that is this incredibly luscious color that he brings to all of his ceramics. So taking a little bit of a closer look at this vase in particular, and you love when you have these wonderful professional photographs that you can blow up to an extraordinary degree. Just starting at the top of this vase, we see it has its removable lid. You can see a little bit of a better sense of that brilliant sort of cerulean blue glaze on the sides that, if you're familiar with porcelain decoration from East Asia, you might recognize a familiar pattern, this sort of looping, repeated pattern in the blue, something that sometimes is referred to as fish scale pattern decoration on porcelain ceramics, or fish roe, thinking of fish eggs. It's referred to by both of those names, but it's something that he has drawn from one particular culture, and he's mixed it up with other elements, which is something, again, that Roberto Lugo does in all of his ceramics. He plucks decorations from Japanese ceramics, from West African textile, from patterns that he has encountered in other places, and he weaves them together into something bold and incredibly beautiful and new. In the central body of the vase, I said that many of his teapots, we have two faces. We have this sort of competing sense of which one are we going to look at first. In Vengo dal Ghetto AOC, the fact that her initials, by which she's often referred to in popular media, are in the very title of the artwork, which translates from Spanish, I come from the ghetto, and then colon AOC. So we have the face of this young woman who I think even if you didn't have any sense of who she was, if you had never heard of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think you would still find her gaze arresting. So she looks not quite at us, maybe off a little bit to my left is the way I look at it when I see her. I see her glasses. I see her hand under her chin in what seems to be a sort of pensive look. I see that she's got her hair sort of pulled back. So there's this sort of very serious appearance to this woman's face. And then what could be in some ways less serious than these two riotous tigers that are flanking her image. So this sense of hybridity of it's never just one thing, something you find in a lot of Roberto Lugo's work, again, something that drew me into this face immediately. So not just that beautiful blue of the fish scale pattern that goes around it, but then the sort of incongruous combination of a serious depiction of this woman who, if we recognize her, we know her to be a US representative for New York City, and then these slinking orange tigers surrounding her face. And behind that, something else. So interrupting the blue repeating pattern of the fish scale on the surface of this glazed ceramic vase, almost as if a window has broken through, and we can see a white background. We can see little bits of blue. We might sort of trace with our eyes where we can see. I'm using my mouse. You might see these little blue lines. You can follow it, imagining as if you were holding the brush that is sketching these blue patterns onto the white. And you see it continues slightly around the side of the vase, but it doesn't go all the way around. So in fact, we can see the outline, the edge of where this window seems to break onto the surface of this vase. And again, if you are familiar with porcelain, if you're familiar with ceramics from East Asia, that very clear contrast of white against blue might immediately put you in mind of Chinese porcelain. And I think that's purposeful. Similarly, that the fish roe, the fish scale pattern, would put you in mind of East Asian porcelain, super fine, elevated ceramics that we expect to find on shelves lining the Metropolitan or the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And something that Roberto Lugo often talks about when he speaks is that he got into making ceramics, he got into making pottery, and he turned his attention to porcelain originally. And one of the reasons he did that was because as he learned art history, he learned about how porcelain was something that was reserved for only those who could afford it. Chinese porcelain, especially think of Ming porcelain, we use like Ming vase to symbolize something extraordinarily luxurious and expensive and rare. And he looked at that as someone who came from this very poor background in Kensington, who had become an artist. And he wanted to adopt that for himself and take that on as a medium that was also a path open to him now as an artist. So we see him combining so far the fish scale pattern of the blue. We have blue and white decoration that is reminiscent of the color relationships we associate with Chinese porcelain. And then again, sort of breaking the illusion, we have these two tigers framing this very serious face of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And he's not done. He's not done sampling from other cultures. If we go to the bottom of this vase, we've lost the blue. No more fish scale. No more fish roe pattern. We see a little bit of the blue and the white that's in that what I call the window breaking onto the surface of the vase. You see the claws of the tigers. And then you notice how even the illusion that this is a window is fractured by the dripping of the white onto the lowest register, let's say the lowest area of this vase. Which again, if you are visually primed, if you have seen examples of pottery that has this characteristic brownish, orange, and black color combination, you may immediately associate the bottom part of the vase with Greek pottery, We have some examples in our museum, if you step into our back gallery, of pottery from the classical Greek period that has this very characteristic color relationship and even these same motifs. So there's sort of we often refer to as the Greek key pattern, this geometric pattern that we can see continuing underneath what has been painted on top of it. We have a black band below that, some spirals, and down here sort of stylized waves going around the foot of the vase. Let's see if I have and there I paired on the left a professionally shot photograph by the gallery with beautiful lighting. On the right, my iPhone 6's best attempt to take a photo of the back of the vase in our gallery. So giving you two different visual experiences of the same object. The one on the right, though, being a little bit closer to what you would experience, what you may experience, if you're able to come and see this vase in person. And what it's showing you is something that the frontal photograph does not capture, and that is a little bit of a sense on the back of how this progression of decoration sort of falls from, we have the blue patterning on the back, there's no windows, there's no image of AOC, there's none of that blue and white porcelain. We see the Greek elements even more strongly on the bottom, and then what is sort of written over the top, what is splashed vibrantly between sort of the zone of East Asian porcelain, the zone of ancient Greek pottery at the bottom, almost as if put on with a paintbrush or maybe a spray can. We have this zone of brilliant yellow overwritten with just hints of blue in a swoop that might start to remind you of graffiti on a wall in an urban context. And I have forgotten to unplug the phone in my office so that it rang while I was here. I don't actually know how to mute it because we're going to find out. I'm borrowing our executive director's office while she is on vacation. So that's why I did not remember to turn that off before I started our presentation. Phones don't ring in the gallery. That's one of the reasons we really want to get back into doing this in person in the gallery so we don't have these sorts of interruptions. But this band of yellow on the back of this vase, which again, was this something that I did see when we were looking at this online in Wexler Gallery. We were drawn to the vase because of the image on the left. And we said, we would love to have that at Fairfield. Please let us have it. And then when it arrived, what an incredible discovery to see the rest of it, to see the rest of what Roberto Lugo has put together in this object. So we have East Asian ceramic influence, we have Greek pottery influence, and then we have graffiti. As if, as I was beginning to say, splashed across the wall, maybe in Kensington, maybe in inner city Philadelphia, maybe somewhere else. And it's a reminder that Roberto Lugo, before he became a ceramics artist, he started out, as many kids will do, tagging. He started out doing graffiti. And it's something that he has been careful to continue and incorporate in his art, sort of never losing sight of the community from which he came, the artistic tradition from which he first began in making graffiti art. And he melded all of these things together into a single object. And something that struck me about even the very form of this vase is that even the form of it seems to combine shapes a little bit. So if you think of it just from its lid down through where we see those spiraling curls where the dripping of the white ends, that follows roughly the shape of something like you might think of like a Chinese ginger jar. So you can Google that sort of form. It sort of ends at a flat, at sort of a flat bottom. It typically doesn't have this foot that we see at the bottom where we have, for example, the wave pattern. Instead, we associate those sort of footed vases. That is something often seen in different types of ancient Greek pottery. So I think even in the very form of the vase, he's drawing on multiple cultural traditions. In its surface decoration, he unifies very disparate cultural traditions. And then again, the sort of eruption onto the surface of what could have been otherwise a fairly sort of calm, perhaps, depiction of, here is Chinese porcelain, here is ancient Greek pottery, and sort of blowing through on the front of it, this very arresting depiction of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So if you've seen any of Roberto Lugo's other work, and I said this a few moments ago, he chooses to feature individuals from the Black community, from the Latinx community, that he wants to see uplifted. Often they are historical figures. So just in the show that's on view in our gallery, we have Zora Neale Hurston, the artist, paired with Malcolm X, the civil rights activist, on a single teapot. We have John Lewis, the recently deceased politician, on a teapot with Martin Luther King Jr. We have Mae Jemison, the first African-American astronaut, on a teapot by herself. She shares it with no one. Instead, there's sort of a riot of interlocking patterns on the back of that teapot. So he chooses these figures because he says he's looking to uplift, he's looking to bring joy and celebration. And he also said in our gallery conversation something that I found very interesting in terms of why he likes to work in ceramics. And I said he started out making porcelain. These are not examples of porcelain, though. In fact, on the label, they are all described as glazed ceramic. And one of the things that separates what is ceramic, what is porcelain, part of it is firing temperature. These objects are not fired to the extraordinarily high temperatures that you would need to produce porcelain. And one of the benefits to him working at that lower firing temperature, as he said, he's able to paint on the surface of the pot before it is fired. He's painting and he's using inks that are the color of what they will appear when they come out of the kiln. If you've ever watched the production, for example, of traditional Chinese porcelain, with that blue and white color pattern that we're seeing a little bit behind AOC on the front of the vase, when they're painting the design on, it goes on sort of like a black wash. And it's the incredible force of the kiln that brings out that brilliant blue of the cobalt that they're using. So in a sense, the final design is unveiled when the object comes out of the kiln. He doesn't work that way. By working in this lower temperature, one of the things he's able to do is see how it's going, the final appearance. He's seeing that as he's painting on the object itself. I forgot for a second where I was going with bringing up how he's painting, choosing AOC. This is what I was remembering, that yeah, he commented when he gave the gallery talk for us a couple of weeks ago. So he was making porcelain, now he makes ceramics more broadly, but why pottery? Like he could be a sculptor in other media, he could be an artist in other forms. What is it that draws this artist to pottery? And he had sort of a simple answer in the sense that he said, pottery is forever. And it seems very simple, but it is actually, it's so true. If we think of how many examples of Ming porcelain, ancient Greek porcelain, we think of the terracotta warriors from ancient China. Pottery, something that you mold with clay and bake in an oven, is seemingly something universal, and seemingly every culture makes some form of pottery, whether for utility or for highly decorative aesthetic objects. And it's incredibly durable. I mean, yes, it can break. That's its chief weakness. Sort of traumatic injury can break a pot into 1,000 pieces. But then those pieces will probably be uncovered by an archaeologist in 100, 500, 1,000 years. So he looks at pottery, at ceramics, as something that is incredibly durable, that will carry not just these colors, these patterns, but these people's faces. It will carry them into the future. And he mentioned specifically when he was talking about this object, many of his pieces feature these historical figures. And sometimes he said they're historical figures that are less known. So Zora Neale Hurston, for example, novelist, perhaps best known today for the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God. Thank you to Professor Peter Bayers here at Fairfield. I read that novel when I was an undergraduate, but for a long time, her name was less well known. He wanted to bring her to the fore in placing her on a teapot with Malcolm X. And he said he thinks of it as sort of an imaginary conversation between these two people. Other times, though, he said he thinks about someone who maybe have that level of fame in the future. So someone who we're talking about today who may be the Zora Neale Hurston of a decade, 2 decades, 100 years from now. So he gave the example of when he started making his work, he made an early example of one of his pots, and he had Harriet Tubman on it. And he said not everyone knew who Harriet Tubman was. So there's a sense of bringing awareness to these figures, of celebrating them. And then he turned to AOC and said, here's someone that is very much in public consciousness right now. She is not a historical figure. She's a contemporary figure in American politics. And at the time that he was giving this talk, the Met Gala had just taken place in New York, I think, before, and AOC had been receiving some criticism online for the dress that she wore that said, tax the rich. And he sort of shrugged and he said, think of all that she does and think of how quick people may be to jump on her for one action that they don't like, that it is not 100% sort of cohering with the rest of their values, when in fact they may agree on most of their values. And he suggested that as an artist, he doesn't make it his goal to criticize. He wants to look for chances for celebration, chances for uplift. And I should mention too that Roberto Lugo, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, comes from Puerto Rican heritage, so there's something that they share. She, of course, coming from the Bronx, and Lugo from Philadelphia. But if we're thinking about pottery being forever, where will this vase be in 10 years, in 100 years, in 500 years? What would an archaeologist make of this object, unearthing it? You imagine in an imagined future, hopefully an extremely long time from now. It's fascinating to think of an artist creating something and thinking about its longevity, not just in their own lifetime and immediately afterwards, but thinking about an object that can travel into the future and carry messages with it. And the thing that I find so enrapturing about this piece, that melding of cultural influences, joining them together, adding literally a splash of his own background in this yellow drawn from a graffiti application, and presenting this sort of, you can't look away from this object when you're in the gallery. I feel every time I walk in there as if I'm drawn to looking at this vase. The richness of the color, it's my desire really to touch it, which of course, as a responsible museum staff member, I would not do, but you want to touch it. You want to feel the texture of this underneath your hands. And you want to get very, very close and see the minute cracks in the surface glaze produced by the firing process. That, of course, doesn't translate in just an image. So for those of you who are able, you're going to have to come to the Fairfield University Art Museum and see if you can take a peek at it in person. But I hope what I've said so far has, in a little bit, shared our great delight in this object. And I think Roberto Lugo has said it himself when he is looking to create these images that uplift and celebrate, that provide, when we say inject some color into our lives, well, I think we could all use things to think about in a celebratory and positive manner right now with the place that our world is. I think these objects do an incredible job at letting us fall into them as objects as well. Like I said, you could come at this object. When I brought my undergraduate students into the gallery and we talked about this, a few of them recognized it. A few of them had no idea who she was. And a few of them said afterwards, oh, well, I know who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, but I didn't recognize that particular representation of her. That's not how I think of her. So you could enjoy this object as an object without really needing a sense of who she is. And what would you take away from it? I would take away perhaps a sense of, what would I say? That she's stern, perhaps determined, with the way her hand is posed, with her glasses staring slightly off to our left. I would say she's someone to be reckoned with. Even if I didn't know who she was and what she does and what she stands for, that's an impression that I would take away. And I would enjoy moving around this object, seeing the interplay of the light on just the case, on the surface of the glaze, and enjoy looking at it as a physical piece. So I hope that many of you are able to do that in person. If you have any questions, by the way, I see a few people have been putting comments into the chat. I appreciate that. If you have any questions that I can answer, of course, some of the questions might be best answered by Roberto Lugo himself. As I said, you can watch his gallery talk for us on our YouTube page. Janet Rogers, an expat living in Bavaria, Germany, says that it's been like a short trip to the USA. Well, thank you for joining us all the way from Germany, where it's, I think, 5 or 6 hours ahead. So you're getting into your early evening. We're delighted to have you join us. We hope that you'll continue to be able to join us for our virtual programs. And I mentioned that we'd love to hear from our viewers about whether you are interested in continuing the virtual version of Art in Focus, or you're looking forward to coming back into the galleries. I should also say that we'd love to hear from you if there are artworks that you would like to see featured. As you may have seen if you followed some of our Art in Focus events over the past 18 months or so, one of the things that I have been taking advantage of the virtual format to do is to highlight objects that are in storage, that are on view, but in a slightly more awkward position in the gallery where it's a little bit more difficult to arrange a group of people on stools. But we can make almost anything work, right? If there's the will, there's the way. That's what AOC's face is telling me on this face. So if you know there's something in the Fairfield University Art Museum's collection that you would love to have a conversation about, whether in person or online, please do let us know. You can visit our website at fairfield.edu/museum, click on collections at the top, and you can browse the full collections of the museum. Maria comments that Lugo has a lot of power in his work for social justice. And I think that's absolutely true. And he says it himself that, and I said before, that he's not necessarily looking to criticize. He knows as well as we do the problems that our world suffers. As he says, he can only look to what he can accomplish with his hands, with his art. And one of the things he chooses to do is to put the faces of these Black and brown individuals who are politicians, civil rights activists, astronauts, writers, to put them before a gallery public, to make sure that we are talking about them and celebrating them. Another speaker we had referred to, Andrew Davenport, called these noisy vessels, which I love, because we don't really imagine pottery as making noise, but he was referring, I think, to that sense of that joyful noise of the conversation between the figures that he places on these pots, which, going back to what I said about porcelain, once upon a time, someone from Roberto Lugo's background would never have been making fine porcelain, nor perhaps would have owned fine porcelain. And yet here he is drawing on all of these influences to create these objects that do celebrate these incredibly important figures from Black, Hispanic, and other cultures. And Eva Jane from Boston, throwing in a plug for continuing the virtual programs, Boston, Bavaria. We know there are lots of people who love art who can't come to our museum. We will do our best to keep our virtual programs accessible to everyone. And we thank so much everyone who has been watching and participating. If you have any other questions that you think of after the fact, feel free to email them to me. You can find my email address on our website, which again, fairfield.edu/museum. With that, I'll thank everyone for joining us this morning, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next virtual Art in Focus.